Unfortunately, I have to use the mic because I'm recovering from a cold. Welcome to May's Feed Your Mind with Kate Atkins Brown from the Atkins May's Family History website. Today, she's going to talk about her family's connection to the Coulson Riverboat line. Before she speaks, I do have a few announcements. Today, we are starting our summer exhibits. The first one is going to be in this room, and it is going to be honoring America's 250th flag display. So as you can see around the room, we do have some flags hanging up. And then right after this Feed Your Mind, we're going to be clearing all the chairs from the center of the room. And we're going to be putting out a gigantic crocheted American flag. So I highly recommend you come back and check that out when we have it on display. The next one that we have is right outside the door on the overlook, and it is a prayer dress. It is a ceremonial prayer dress with full regalia, so it's a jingle dress out there. It's very beautiful. And speaking of beautiful, on the other side of the overlook, we have the courtier swim home dress, which is a dress that was worn by a courtier of Queen Victoria, and she apparently wore it when she was around Queen Victoria. Later on in the summer, on June 1st, we're going to be opening the Baylor and Bob Art Exposition, and both of them did art in our newest permanent exhibit, A Dakota Story, so they're going to come and show off their other pieces of art that they have done. This year, we will be participating in the Yankton Area Kids Art Festival, so bring your kids by, and this year we're going to be having them decorate and design their own 250th anniversary stamp, so they can design their own. We are having the cemetery walk this year on June 3rd, and we're partnering with the library again this year. We're going to be featuring people from our newest exhibit, A Dakota Story, so highly recommend you go get tickets from the library. And Tea and Mead tickets are on sale now. It is going to be on July 12th. And my last announcement is the next Feed Your Mind is on June 5th with our very own Crystal. She's going to be talking about Yankton historical photography. So yeah, and now I will hand it off to Kay.
Now, I don't like to speak with a microphone, so can everybody hear me? Good. There's a wonderful echo here. First of all, it's so wonderful for me to see this many people here. You know, I'm a student of history. I teach a history class in Northfield, Minnesota, specifically for seniors, people over the age of 50 and whatever. And just recently, I read that, and I think it was in the South Dakota, not the South Dakota magazine, but the London South Dakota Historical Society, where they talked about history being dead. You know, that there were times people think that history is dead and people are not interested in history. But I look at you and look at, there's such a wonderful crowd here for a Friday afternoon at noon. And I tell you, it gives me inspiration to keep doing my historical research. Because my gosh, there are people out there who are interested. And so thank you all for coming. Are you ready? Okay. Over 40 years ago, I was one of the founding organizers of the Yankton Riverboat Days. And it was 1984, and I was working at Yankton College back then. So I used to live here back in the 80s. And I was also part of the Yankton Area Arts Association. And there was a group of us in town. It was, probably over a couple glasses of wine or something. But we decided that we needed to have a festival. So there was a group of us that got together. Riverboat plans are, of course, and lots of people you may recognize here that got together. Here's Doug in here. Got together and said, well, gee, you know, we need to have some sort of a celebration. And so, of course, what would be the most natural thing to have to celebrate? Well, riverboat days. And so that kind of began my whole interest in the whole idea of riverboat days. But I directed the Miller, and we had it on a big flatbed trailer. And Roger Pierce, I don't know if you remember Roger or not, Roger Pierce was the hero. And Pat Johnson was the damsel in distress. And for some reason, I cannot remember who the villain was. I cannot remember. I keep thinking maybe that it was Bob Terezinski, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But it was well received, and we really had a lot of fun doing that. And right up here is Don Denninger was one of my favorite people, and he was such an asset to the community. And he's there having a ball. What he did, one of his duties was he would hold up the yay sign. You know, when the hero came in, he'd go, yay! And he'd walk around, yay! And then he'd have the boo sign, boo, boo, boo. So we really had a good time. But it was beginning, like I said, my interest in the riverboat case. Because Yankton's history is steeped and correlated to the riverboats. Now, not only is Yankton's history correlated to the riverboats, but my paternal ancestry is also connected to the riverboats. And I have to introduce my sister today. And this is my sister Gloria. So when I say Gar, it's my sister Gloria and myself. And by the way, today is Gloria's birthday. Happy birthday! Okay, this was our great-grandfather, Levi Adkins. Now, these pictures were taken about the same time when their involvement in the riverboat happened. So I'm very lucky to have these old tin types. So this was my great-grandfather, Levi Adkins. This is his son, Del. His real name was Adelbert, but everybody called him Del. And then this was my great-uncle, Urbane Adkins, but everybody called him Barney. I don't have a picture of my grandfather, who was also involved in the riverboats, because he was too young at the time he was not here yet. He was not in the area, so he was back in Wisconsin. And so he did not get his picture taken at the same time these were. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them later. But this is my ancestors that all kind of were involved in the riverboat. Fortunately, what my ancestors did is they wrote letters. And fortunately, someone in our family, actually it was my great-aunt, had the belief or foreknowledge that maybe some of this time letters will be valuable. So she kept the letters from the great-grandfather, from the great-uncle, from all of these people, and fortunately, it's been passed down from generation to generation. And sometimes when I open these old letters or these old journals or these old diaries, it's amazing because all of a sudden you're there, you're back there reading. Do any of you have any old letters or anything that you've kept in your family? You do? Okay, do you know how long ago?
My great-grandmother,
Okay.
so well over 100 years ago.
Wow.
And some things are from here. I'm not from here, I'm from Wisconsin. And I just found a connection in this area that I have cousins I didn't know I had.
Wow. That's good. Somebody else have? Okay, but it's wonderful, it's wonderful. So what I'm going to be using is, in part of my presentation, is I'm going to actually be using facts and letters from from Marnie especially, and then from Dell. So those are the resources, some of the resources that I had. One of the other things that I used, one of my treasures, was that when I lived here in Yankton, back in the 80s, I happened to go to the Yankton Public Library. I love the Yankton Public Library. It's such an incredible resource for this community. And lo and behold, there was this big old thick book which was published in 1897, and it was called The Memorial and Biographical Records of Dakota Territory. And I opened it up, and there was a whole dissertation, a whole biography of my great uncle Dell. And, you know, I thought, wow, I'm really tied to Yankton, and I'm really tied to the area here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to give you some, you probably all know this about the history of riverboat, but for a little while I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of riverboats. Riverboats, as we recognize them now, did not really exist prior to the 1830s. Good old Robert Fulton built a steamboat, of course, called the Claremont, and it was 1807. I have a little bit of problems sometimes with the riverboat and the steamboats, but actually throughout history, they're kind of correlated. So you can say steamboat and it means one thing, and riverboat means the other thing, but there's, you know, you can kind of intertwine them. So I use, sometimes I'll say steamboats, and sometimes I'll say riverboats. Okay, but Clinton designed his steamboat for the deep waters of the East Coast rivers. Of course, there wasn't that big of a demand in our area for deep water steamboats, because we didn't have deep waters. However, in the 1830s, things changed. The American Fur Trade Company, partially owned by Pierre Chateau, saw an opportunity for the use of a steamboat, and if it was modified a little bit, to carry furs and supplies on the rivers into the West. Okay? The American Fur Trade Company designed and redesigned Fulton's boats to become sleeker and lighter, to adapt specifically to the perils of the Missouri River. The first steamboat, the Yellowstone, left St. Louis in April of 1831 and reached Fort Tecumseh, which was later Fort Pierre, and in June. And this is a picture by the famous Western artist Carl Walmer. And he painted this picture of the Yellowstone. But what I love about this picture is that it really tells the treacherousness, is that a word? The treachery? Anyway, the bad conditions of trying to go up the Missouri River with people having to, you know, fight the waters, stuff them in the river. So, I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't easy sailing. It was a terribly, terribly treacherous place. Okay. The Yellowstone steamed by the future location of Yankton. And of course, that Yankton at that time was inhabited by the Native Americans. And the boat was an absolute wonderment. And they called it the fireboat that walks on the water. In 1832, the Yellowstone was the first steamboat to reach Fort Union in the upper Missouri River in Dakota Territory. And it proved the steamboats could navigate all the way up to the mouth of the Yellowstone River. And I think this was really interesting. What the Yellowstone was carrying up the Yellowstone River was 1,500 gallons of liquor. And of course, they used that liquor to trade, but in load of beaver pelts and bison and all sorts of fur trade. But early commerce on the Missouri, that particular kind of commerce, did not last long. Beaver pelt hats. Do you have one in your museum?
Yeah, a picture of one.
Okay, all right. The beaver pelts hats that everybody was so fashionable. Well, they went out of fashion. And so also what happened is the smallpox came and ravaged quite a bit of the sources for their furs, of course, which were the Native Americans. Okay, this particular riverboat, the Yellowstone, was sold in 1835 to for the Texas cotton trade. They sold it, they moved it down to Texas. And it appeared at that time that the time of the fireboats that walked on the water had ended. Okay. But not really. There was a small resurgence of steamboat commerce in 1859. Okay, when Dakota Territory was opened. Yankton was platted in 1859, and it became a port of entry and key shipping area of goods, many arriving by steamboat. Yankton had been far-sighted enough, founders of Yankton had been far-sighted enough to have created a superb steamboat landing nearly the entire length of the town's riverfront. The American Fur Truck Company still had its hand in the business, and in 1860, their steamboat, the Chippewa, got further than any other on the upper Missouri, reaching Fort Benton in Montana Territory. The boat was captained by John Marsh. Okay, this is his brother, Joseph. And Joseph Clark became one of the history's most renowned captains. His arrival in Yankton on the Shreveport in 1861 opened the season. And, you know, we think about riverboats, but we forget how short the season was for the riverboats. Mid-May, possibly. Through September, possibly. You know, depending on the weather condition. And one of the things, do some of you remember Bob Karlovitz? Okay, who is a wonderful historian for the city of Yankton. And by the way, this is a picture of the steamboat, Chippewa. Okay, anyway, he wrote an article where it was actually, he was quoted in an article, a piece that appeared in the Yankton Dakota. Is that the way you say it, Bernie? Okay. They were one of the earliest newspapers. And think about this, what it must have been like. Here comes this riverboat into this, this wonderful little town, okay? And this is how they described it. The young and old gathered at the levee to greet the incoming vessel, including many ladies who took out their handkerchiefs and waved. You always find, relatively finely dressed ladies with their handkerchiefs going and welcome. And the governor at the time, who was William James, with members of both houses of the territorial legislatures, showed up to greet the riverboat. And of course, William James, James in his governor's role, asked Joseph Clark, why don't you come into Yankton? We will give you lots of hospitality, come to our places and whatever. But, they were proud of their town. I don't know what kind of hospitality they would have been giving, but, they said, come to the town. And Joseph said, no, he said, I don't have time to do that. However, we welcome here. I have these wonderful cases of champagne. And so all of the people that came to see the riverboat, they drank champagne and toasted the riverboat. And they drank champagne and then they toasted the town. And then they drank champagne and toasted the barge. Okay, so they finally left with everybody waving much more energetically because of the champagne as they took off up the river. But the real resurgence at that time was something that was not above the ground. It was not something that was kind of above the ground, but most important, it was below the ground. What happened, of course, that really made a boom in the riverboat business was the gold rush. And in 1862, also, Dakota Territory was open for homesteading. And that same year, there was a rich strike in Montana Territory, creating gold fever all over the country. Forts were built to supply the influx of new people. How would they transport the supplies? On the river, of course. And what community profited most? Yankton profited most from all of this activity. Companies like the Missouri River Transportation Company, owned by the Coulson line, we'll talk a little bit about that more, in Yankton, and the Benton, oh, I don't have that in Mead here, but there's also one called the Benton and Baker line, which actually is one that we'll talk about a little bit later. They were out of Bismarck, and they saw an opportunity to make a sizable profit in providing boats to carry goods of all types, including ammunition, Hotchkiss guns, and soldiers to Fort Benton in Montana Territory to protect the gold miners. This is one of those fascinating things. During the heyday of the Montana Gold Rush, in a 2-year period between 1867 and 1868, the steamboats carried approximately $24 million worth of gold on the return trips down the river. $24 million worth of gold. And what's also interesting is that I don't believe that there was any major robberies. Press in Dakota featured a segment called The River, which listed the daily comings and goings of all of the river boats. And there were a lot of them coming and going. Okay, you all may be familiar with this guy and this house. Of course, this is Commodore Coulson. And I'm going to just kind of refresh your memory a little bit about Commodore Coulson. First of all, I think we're honored today to have, I think, at least one relative of Commodore Coulson. Where's he? There.
These are all Coulsons.
These are all Coulsons. Oh my gosh, that's absolutely wonderful. And that, you know, the community that continues, okay? So Sanford Coulson, with his brothers John, Martin, and William. Now you're a descendant of John, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And you, and they're all descendants? Huh?
My first brother.
Okay, so they're all descendants of John, okay. So, anyway, Sanford, and John, and Martin, and William operated the Coulson packet lines of steamboats in the late 1800s, 1860s. They ran their boats on the Ohio River from Pittsburgh to St. Louis. So that's where they got started in the Ohio River. Of course then, all this stuff going on, the Coulson packet line was definitely interested in expanding the river trade beyond St. Louis. And so in 1870, the Coulson line changed its name to the Missouri River Transportation Company. And this is when they built their first steamboat, the Far West. It was one of the 10 steamboats that they were to build in Pittsburgh to operate the Missouri River. It was the far west, under the command of Captain Grant Marsh, which became forever famous in steamboat history. And Grant Marsh joined the Coulson Brothers Company in 1871. He had the record for the fastest steamboat. It was never equaled after that in the annals of steamboating. And that's when he brought the wounded soldiers of Custer's army under Major Reno to Fort Lincoln. It was a distance of 920 miles, and it was covered in 54 hours. So he must have had that thing stoked up really hard, really hard. Okay, the Coulson Company built and operated more steamboats than any other company operating on the Missouri River. They operated as many as 14 steamboats, and some of them were actually chartered, but they operated 14 steamboats. And so it was through as many seasons as they could possibly go through. I also just kind of a little aside, you know, the Coulsons were known, you know, of course he was all Commodore Coulson, but from my reading, I would have liked to have met the man. They say that he was very pleasant. He had a pleasing personality, and he had a warm nature. He was welcoming to everybody, and he would host friends whenever he could. And so he was a very gregarious and wonderful person. And then on the other hand, also, he had an extremely public spirit about him. And he was, of course, been recognized as one of the most substantial and prominent citizens of Yankton. So you've got quite a legacy behind the Coulsons. Okay, now. The other thing I realized, this is the far west. And I found this a wonderful picture. Look at the interior of that riverboat. It's not walking around inside that riverboat. There is wine on the table. There is silver on the table, white linens, chandeliers. I mean, you know, the captain, good old Grant Marsh, on that riverboat. Okay. Now I'm going to talk just a little bit about Grant Marsh, too. Grant Marsh was supposedly what would you call him? The greatest steamboat man ever. That's what they called him, Grant Marsh. Because, well, first of all, you know, he took the soldiers from the Battle of the Big One, you know, so I mean, he knew what he was doing. But they still say he was the greatest captain on both the Missouri and the Yellowstone rivers. And if you think about that, if you go back to that original picture, so he was a little pilot. He had migrating buffalo herds. That's something I hadn't even thought about before. You know, go down the river, and you know, all of a sudden, you know, how many buffaloes are going to be, you know, maybe trying to cross the river where you're going from? You're from one place to another place. I mean, you don't think about things like that. Oh, stop, buffalo crossing, you know. And then, of course, then we had the weather, the windstorm, the tornadoes, and all of the underwater hazards. You know, that, you know, like the old Mark Twain, when they would have the marking the sandbars and stuff. I mean, you can't mark a tree in a river. You know, you can't say, oh, we gotta go this way because, you know, I mean, you had to just be very, very careful about what you were doing. So he knew the river, and he had so many journeys up and down that river, and so many experiences about that river. Of course, like I said, he was captain of the Far West. But I kind of some of you will know the rest of his history. But he quit, being a riverboat captain because, well, number one, the traffic kind of went down. But then for a while, he operated a snag boat, which was kind of other special boat they had on the river to try to pull snags out and get them onto the way and stuff. And he bought himself a couple of other river boats, tried to stay in business, and then moved to Bismarck, North Dakota. But right about that time, he got into a fight with a guy, I can't remember the guy's name, so it just left me. Anyway, but the guy charged Marsh with assault and won his case. And Marsh got his pilot's license taken away from him because of that. And he died in 1916, and by that time he was near poverty. And here, beautiful house, beautiful life, ended up dying in poverty in North Dakota in 1916. Oh, okay. Okay. Our family first encountered the riverboat in the late 1860s. Levi, Barney, and Dell left Wisconsin in 1867. They left, of course, for the gold fields. The trio, outfitted in Omaha, took a riverboat to Yankton, Dakota Territory, and then on to Montana to strike rich they were. Okay, where they went through is they traveled through running water, there's still a running water landing, isn't there? Yeah, okay. So they traveled through running water in Dakota Territory, and this is by near Fort Granville. Fort Granville. Isn't that interesting? They traveled through running water, and then they went past this is running. Then they passed through Fort Granville, and then they went up to, I love this picture, then they went up to Fort Sully in Bismarck. And then they arrived in Fort Benton, Montana. One of the first riverboat captains that my ancestors met was John Large. And Large captained the steamers and Chippewas, I mentioned before, and then the Yellowstone and others to open the waters to Montana. My great-uncle Barney became friends with John Large and wrote back and forth, talked to him and whatever. And in a letter, Barney writes, Captain LaBarge said he thought the old money had got me when he couldn't find me last fall. Later in 1885, from a letter from Maine, Barney, Captain LaBarge fell dead in the pilot house of Steamboat Helena a few days ago. The boat is now due here. Okay. My grandfather Zion, who had been left at home, struck out on his own in 1868 to join his family. He was 13. Came all by himself, 13. Actually went down worked at a time in the mines of Utah, and then worked his way back up to meet his family in Montana at that time. And I'm thinking, holy baloney, here's this 13-year-old kid, going all by himself, finding out where his people are, and taking a riverboat and finally end up finding these people in Montana.
All that without a phone.
What?
Without a phone.
Yeah, without a phone. Without a phone. I'll tell you some other, I'm not going to do this, but in one of my other things, I'm working on my grandfather's story about doing that. And actually, this is just an aside, but he worked in the mines of Utah for a while, the silver mines in Utah, I said. and actually had a encounter with Brigham Young, which was another little interesting story. Okay, okay, we got it? Okay. Early riverboats, pilots called the river misery. And they always said, because it's too thick to drink and too thin to plow. Probably heard that before. Dead trees fell in it, ready to snag any unsuspecting boat. Drag boats, which you see here, were built to help remove some of those snags. But navigating the river was very difficult. The current was furious and the channels constantly changing. A good pilot on a riverboat could command just about any salary. The best of them received as high as $1,000 a month. And some of the captain's average monthly salary was $200, which was still quite a bit. But one of the biggest challenges for the riverboat travel was the huge amount of wood they needed. They had to stoke those riverboats with wood. And the boats that were powered by steam were fueled by the cottonwoods that were growing along the Missouri River. 1 to 2 cords of wood were needed per mile. Can you imagine that? 1 to 2 cords of wood per mile to feed their engines. That's a lot. That's a lot. Well, about this time, I have to tell the story. I don't want to take up too much time. I have to tell the story. So, my people were in Montana. Zina, Bell, Bain. I call him Bain. I call him Barney. And Levi were in Montana looking for gold. And they actually had the 5th gold claim in Montana. And it was up by Forest City, Montana. Well, they were working their claim, and they had a claim that there's 2 kinds. One of them is one for clay, you can dig down and you can dig in. Okay, so my people were digging in, and the guy by the name of Melbourne was digging down. Well, guess what happened? They got, they came together. And the story goes is that Bain decided that Melbourne was way out of his limits and shot him. And didn't kill him. But Melbourne took him to court, and they said, well, Melbourne was in the rights and they had no claim, so they had to leave Montana. So their gold mining days were done. So enterprising people, as they were, they thought, well, we're here anyway. What else can we do? I know. We could become woodhawks. Now here comes a riverboat. You're the only people that are selling wood. That's a pretty good reason. I don't think they advised anybody, but they became woodhawks. They started selling wood to the riverboats. And according to the biographical record, my family were at a place called Arrow Creek in 1877. And that's where a tributary of the Missouri, and they started a wood yard. And they stayed there for 4 years, accumulating very tidy sum of money. Dell himself saved $4,000, which was a lot of money. And as reported in the Daily Press and Dakota in 1879, there was heavy riverboat traffic leaving Yankton to go up the Missouri, and of course they profited from all of that heavy traffic. But being a woodhawk, living out in Montana, in the middle of winter, and there's nobody else around, is not necessarily the best lifestyle you want to have. money to buy themselves quite a chunk of land in Milltown, South Dakota, from the wood that they sold during the river homes. By the way, my great-grandfather Levi, as soon as they didn't get gold, he just took off. The boy stayed in Montana. Okay. I think that was, okay, go ahead. So that was what we're talking about in the memorandum. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, Barney stayed in Montana, and he opened his own woodyard in a little place called Judith, Montana. And he left behind a leather-bound logbook of all of the cords of wood that he sold and to which riverboat. And so I can pretty much tell which riverboat stopped in Judith Landing and which riverboat captains that my great uncle had to deal with. And and he told stories about that. And we shared a little bit of those stories. This riverboat here, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I'll get back to that. Okay, but anyway, Marty stayed in Montana and opened his own woodyard in Judith. And he actually, like I said, sold some of the most famous riverboats in Missouri. And this riverboat, I think it was here, this riverboat was the Helena and Helena. How would you say that? Helena? Helena? Helena. I should know that. Okay, Helena. Okay, this was the Helena. And the Helena made 50 trips over 10 years. And this was the boat that carried the Sioux Indians to the Standing Rock Reservation after the Sioux Wars. But it was snagged in 1891 and sunk. A lot of the pictures that I have comes from a collection from the South Dakota Historical Society, and it was the Henry J. King collection. And King was the master captain on the Baker line. And that Barney sold wood to Henry J. King. But just as an aside, he also captained the Far West for a while, and he lived in Chamberlain for many years. And some of you may know his great-great-grandson, who was Noel Hamlin, who was a former editor of the Press and Co. So he had a connection to that. Okay. But being a woodhog was a hard and lonely existence. Barney writes a series of letters to his brother Delbert in 1885. March. Our winter seems to be broke here, though we are apt to have another storm. Not much snow, but severe cold weather, 60 below at places. I have but little news now to write, but I'm really not doing anything, and I have no excitement of any kind. Cannot send a photograph because it's impossible to get one within 250 miles. In June 16th, he's just sitting there, June all by himself. June 16th, sit down to write you a few letters as I am corralled indoors. We are having the worst rainstorm I have ever saw in the country. The river is out of its banks and still rising. I have some wood I have been watching. Weather is too bad to look after. It's so wet and be useless anyway. Everything is wet. I laid in wet blankets for a week. I feel about 75 years old and look just about that. He was a young man. On June 17th, a friend of Marnie's, John Hammond, writes to Dell, Sir, I address this letter in reference to your brother, Barney. He is here doing a little good for himself, and as his present business is such, and requires him to be alone most of the time, and you know his disposition. position. I think it would be good if you could induce him to come down there and where there's kind of different scenery and something to live for. As the life of a woodhawk is enough to drive any man crazy. So a break came. A break came in 1887 when Barney came down the river to Yankton. His purpose was to investigate a piece of property Dell was about to purchase in Milltown. But he stayed in their Germania house, which no longer exists. And here's the only picture I could find of the Germania house. And of course it was built for people coming into the Yankton area. It was built as a, like kind of boarding house or hotel. And I think there's a bell somewhere. Is it in the museum here? There's something about the Germania house. I think there's a bell, or there may be a set of keys or something. From the Germania house. It's in this museum. But anyway, so he writes to his brother on Germania House stationery. So it must have been, enough high class to have their own stationery, which I think is wonderful. The reason he went to Yankton, of course, he stayed there for a little while, and it gave him the opportunity. He had a friend there who lived there who was named Captain William Gould. And Gould had captained the steamer Josephine, and Barney had sold wood to him. And Captain Gould was a long-time resident of Yankton. In one of his letters, Barney thought Yankton was just a lovely place. I have to look it up. Okay, it's a lovely place. Okay, and it was a bustling place. You guys will have to forgive me. I'm maybe one slide off. Okay, can we go back? That was the dream. There, okay, good. Okay, anyway, I was right, sorry. Okay, it was a bustling place. There was riverboat traffic, and the riverboat traffic was at its highest between 1870 and 1880. During that time, South Dakota's population soared from 11,000 to 98,000 hardy souls. In 1873, the railroad came to Yankton. From there, the vast territories of Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana relied on the good that came up for their very existence. Okay, a big blow to this prosperity was the winter of 1888 and 1881. Many boats were wintered in Yankton that year, and the season produced days of terribly cold and snow. When the thaw started, the ice jammed and the water rose. Many of the riverboats docked were severely damaged, unusable for the season. Some were never repaired. Here's the one. Bustling, wonderful Yankton. And here is a picture of the ice where they got stuck in the ice. But I love this picture. And that shows, the enthusiasm and life that was in Yankton at that particular time. Okay, by 1890, the heyday of the riverboats were passing. Railroads were taking over. Many riverboats had already been taken by the treacherous Missouri. In the annual report of the Missouri River Commission for the fiscal year ending in 1897, a compilation of the loss of boats was not 295 that were lost in the Missouri River from the beginning of the steamboat navigation to the date of the report, and 20 were lost in the present state of South Dakota. A snag took the Trump. A tornado took the Penina. and fire explosions were common. The riverboat Antelope, 20 miles above Yankton, the riverboat exploded and killed 2. And of course, the ice was treacherous. The railroads came, and by the 1900s, the riverboat, in the heyday of the riverboat, was over. And the only thing that was left was a few ghosts. In 1981, the hull of the riverboat was found in a sandbar just downstream from Yankton. And it was taken by the river a few years ago. I don't think you can even see that anymore. I think that's gone. Okay. In 1890, Barney quit wood hauling. And he tried homesteading for a while. But the river took him too. He drowned in Missouri in 1892. So I want to thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I've kind of been chasing your story since I was a little kid. And the story was the riverboat, which sank in Armport Bed with 100 barrels of Kentucky bourbon. I don't know if it's myth, but my grandfather was determined he was going to find it.
Did he ever?
Not that, but he was a real wildcatter and did all kinds of other stuff. But I always remember that story, but I cannot find anything about it.
I find the stories of riverboats incredibly fascinating because it's like a tiny little segment in a very short period of time in history. But yet it's made such a tremendous impact. First of all, in Dakota Territory, second of all, in Yankton, and third of all, in my family's life. And to imagine what all that was like in those days is absolutely fascinating to me. Thank you.